is may not be Tuesday mornings anymore. At least today it's not. Shuli, would you know it? Does it continue Tuesday after this? I don't know. But because I so much would love to be sharing Torah with you on a consistent basis. This is the Parsha of Vayishlach, and it's an extraordinary Parsha. I think we once studied this where we may have done a word, a session, or a letter, a session. But I wanted to study with you one of the episodes, which really is probably one, not only of the most famous, but of the most provocative and inspiring, because it could take one in so many directions, found in the whole of the Torah. As a matter of fact, there's been books written on it. I can think of a book that was called Wrestling with God. And that, of course, is referring to that moment before Jacob is going to meet his brother Esau. And in the middle of the night, there is this strange, actually anonymous, we don't know who it is exactly, but some anonymous person is wrestling with Jacob, and who that was and how all of this comes together is the subject of much discussion. But my point of departure, to do this in a way that is a bit more scholarly, although learning with my son, the scholar, I've learned I'm no scholar. I'm a humble rabbi, theologian, but I'm no scholar. Dove is a scholar. He really gets it. So, but to kind of present it in a more intellectual framework, we all know the story that in the beginning of the portion, we're told that Jacob sends out emissaries. He knows that he's going to be meeting Esau. He had not seen him for 22 years, and Esau had been the victim of Jacob taking the blessings. And he wants to know what his posture is, how he's doing, and if his emissaries could get a sense of whether he was open to peace. And they come back and they say, Esau's marching towards you, and the language in the Bible is Varba Me'ot Ish Imo. He has 400 men with him. And the Bible has its own language. And when it says 400 men, it means duck. 400 men, that is the number that is often used to denote a force that is not only formidable, even though in contemporary times it's a small force, but 400 men in the Bible, for example, when David, when he fought the Philistines, he was with 400 men. When one sees the word 400, that number, accompanying some leader, you know they're out for blood. And they come back and they say to Jacob, he's marching with 400 men. And then let's look at the scene, moving ahead a couple of sentences. They meet. And when they meet, Esau is not interested in war. He embraces his brother. And Jacob embraces him, of course. And so the question that is our point of departure is the following. If he's marching with 400 men and his intent is to fight to the end with his brother Esau, then what happened in the interim to change his approach? Why, when he meets Jacob, is Esau not belligerent at that point? He's quite accommodating. What happened in the middle? Now, the truth is, nothing happened in the middle as it relates to something that occurred between Jacob and Esau. But the episode of the wrestling match is what occurred in the middle. And so I'd like to present to you two approaches to that wrestling match. Again, scene one is he's coming to fight. And let's say scene two is this wrestling match. Jacob prepared for the battle, but the night before he has this wrestling match with this mysterious person. And scene three is that Jacob and Esau embrace. And our question was, what happened between scene one and scene three to transform Esau's intentions from warring to embracing? And what happened, the only thing you could see in the Bible, this is Pshuto Shel Nikra, the literal interpretation, was this wrestling match. There was a Jewish commentator by the name of Beno, B-E-N-N-O, Jacob, who lived in Germany. I believe he lived probably at the turn of the century, that is the 19th century coming into the 20th century. And this is what he says. This is his language. He writes that when Jacob struggles with that mysterious being in the middle of the night, Jacob wins the struggle, but in the process, he's wounded. He leaves that battle, he leaves that encounter limping. And according to Bino Yaakov, when Jacob is limping and walking towards Esau, and Esau sees that he's struggling to walk, it's not just that he felt compassion for him, it's much more than that. He saw the Jew bent over, as they say in Yiddish, he's bent over. He's condescending. He can't even walk. He has no backbone. He has no strength. Jacob kind of presented himself as almost having been self-defeated. And so from Bino Jacob's perspective, the heart, now looking at this incident more broadly, how it relates to contemporary times or to the Jewish challenge throughout the centuries to survive, from his perspective, the heart of the adversary is won over if the Jew endears himself to the enemy, if the Jew is seen bending, walking wounded, showing vulnerability. To be passive, to run from the struggle, to show weakness. Maybe that's the only way. We can't confront throughout the centuries the government that's in charge. All we can do is we can bend over, we can show how we're so exposed, and hope out of pity maybe we'll somehow negotiate in such a way that we will survive. That is what the Bino Yaakov says. And I do want to add that I think commentaries were very, very much impacted by the times in which they lived. Bino Jacob lived in Germany, as I said, at the turn of the century coming into the 1900s. And so he lived at a time when the Jewish community in Germany was seeking good relations with the German government. If one looks at some of the prayer books that were published at that time, in the front of the book, it indicates the year the book was published and also where it was published. So in Sidurim that I have seen, it says this Sidur was published in Berlin. And then it says, today's Jerusalem. Think about that. Published in Berlin, today's Jerusalem. And so the Jew really was not that powerful in Germany, but we presented ourselves in a way that we were negotiating for our welfare. And sometimes we presented ourselves as needy, and we were ingratiating ourselves to the government officials for help. This is one approach that is something for us to consider, but I don't want to stop here. I do want to present the other approach. So the first approach is that what changes Esau's mind is the Jew is condescending. It's sort of like, in America, if a Jewish teenager is going to be assaulted in an anti-Semitic attack, it's not uncommon for the Jewish teenager to run the other way. By the way, in Israel, anybody who's going to stand up to one of my grandkids or your grandkids living in Israel, I don't know if they're going to win the fight, but they're not going to run away. That's for sure. They're going to stand, and they are going to stand strong. But Bino Yaakov said what he said. Now let's take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam was the grandson of Rashi, and he reached his prime in commentary towards the end of the 11th century, which is the time of the First Crusades. And sometimes I think what I'm about to offer to you in his interpretation may speak to how he wished deep down the Jewish community could react to having been attacked by crusaders and living in such a hostile society. Here's what he says, and this is a radical position. But Rashbam was a literalist, Reb Shmuel ben Meir. A literalist means, you'll be happy to hear, Estelle, he reads the text literally. He doesn't go to the Midrash. He reads it, and even if it is going to yield a radical idea, he's willing to put it forth. He sees this confrontation of Jacob very, very differently. And he wonders, he starts with this question when discussing this confrontation, just a few more moments. The Torah says that, again, scene one, Esau is coming. It sounds like to kill Jacob. Scene two is this battle. But in preparation for the battle, we all know what Jacob does. He prepares his family. He divides whatever he has into different camps. He's preparing. He's with his family. Minute by minute, he really is very protective of his family. And then, suddenly, the Torah says, Vayivater Yaakov Livado. Jacob was alone. And so Rashbam, this literalist, the grandson of Rashi in the 11th century, the end of the 11th century, asks, why was he alone? He was with his family. How come he was alone? And this is what he says, and he spells this out. He says, look at the way Jacob throughout his life reacted to challenges. There is a common theme. There's a common denominator. Let's go to the beginning. Jacob takes the blessings from Esau. And his mother then says, look, Esau's upset with you. You better run. You better run away. Now, if mother says to Jacob to run, that means she felt that Jacob didn't have the backbone to stand up to Esau. He took the blessings. Maybe the best way would have been we're brothers. And Jacob to seek Esau out and say, listen, I want to have a man-to-man conversation with you. I want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you how it happened. I want to tell you why it happened. I want to tell you what I'm thinking. If you have a difference, you just fess up, you stand up. But it's clear that Rebecca felt that that was not Jacob's personality. So she instructs him to run away. And he runs for 22 years. He's away from his parents' home. Now let's continue Jacob's life. He is in the house of his mother's brother, Lavan. And he falls in love with Rachel. And that is, of course, Lavan's daughter. And he says, I'll work for 7 years for Rachel. And they marry. And they get up the next morning, and guess what? It's not Rachel, it's Leah. Now, in Torat Ahavah, I write kind of tongue-in-cheek. No one has burnt the book yet. I wish they would. Maybe it would help, push it forward. But I argue that maybe the two women were really one woman. But sometimes when we marry, whether we marry, when we get up, we're going to find out that there are aspects of the personality of the person we married that we didn't know about before we got married. So he gets up and there's a little bit of Leah and Rachel. Okay, let's push that aside. He gets up, how this happened, how he can go to sleep with his wife and not know that it's not his wife. Ich weiß nicht. Whatever my Rebbes would tell me when I was a yeshiva boy, what they would tell me is they would make sure they would not learn this episode. Believe me, they would skip it. And we always knew, we guys, that whatever they skip, that's got to be the stuff we got to learn. That's got to be the part of Peyton Place. We got to read it, very, very closely. Anyway, he gets up, according to the text. Rashbam is a literalist. And he says to Laban, hey, I worked 7 years for Rachel. You gave me Leah. And they talk a little bit. And Jacob and Laban says, hey, this is the way we do things. But you know what? Work another 7 years for Rachel. Now, just imagine a person being in that setting. He would be outraged. He'd grab for his father-in-law's neck. And if he wouldn't murder him on the spot, who knows what he would do? What's Jacob's reaction? Fine, no problem. I'll work for another 7 years. No problem. Again, he's running from the challenge rather than standing up to Lavan and saying, Lavan, how dare you? He's accommodating. He kind of, yes, he acquiesces. Let's move his life further. So now he's in Laban's house and they enter into some business transactions. Their business was, they were shepherds. Jacob says to Laban, listen, let's make a deal. I'll give you all the spotted and speckled cattle. I'll keep the cattle that are non-spotted and non-speckled. And whatever will be born into my flock that is spotted and speckled will be mine. Laban hears this. He says, hey, that's a pretty good deal. He's giving me all the spotted and speckled who clearly are going to birth spotted and speckled animals. He's keeping those who are of the whole color, whatever color it was, non-spotted and non-speckled. He's not going to have any spotted or speckled animals. And something happens and he does have it. And then Lavan switches the arrangement and says, oh, this was not what I agreed. I agreed on something else. And the Bible has Jacob saying to, in the end, the Bible tells us that Laban switched the deal on 10 different occasions. And Jacob says nothing. He says nothing. Finally, the last piece of Jacob's life, he says to his wives, Rachel and Leah, your father is not honest with me. I've never stood up to him, but he's not honest. And they decide they should go. But when do they go? They go in the dark of the night. In the middle of the night, they escape. You would think before he goes, he would at least say goodbye to Lavan or may say something of his disappointments. But this was his modus operandus. The modus operandus of Jacob was, when challenged, what did he do? He ran. And I would add, maybe that's why his name was Yaakov. What does Yaakov mean? It's from the word akev, which means heel. And it speaks to the Jew throughout the generations. Yes, in the 20th century as well, when I grew up, the Jews used to live where? In Williamsburg, and except for the Hasidim, the Jews, when they felt challenged, they ran. And they ran to Crown Heights. Then they ran to Flatbush. And then they ran to Queens. And then they ran to Long Island. Jacob was a runner. When you are challenged, what do? You run. Think about our synagogue. Our synagogue used to be the Hebrew Institute of University Heights. When the going got rough, everyone left. They ran to, where, to Co-op City. That's where they ran. You got to hand it to Lubavitch. Lubavitch never left Crown Heights. They said they're going to stay, even though now I'm told that many are selling their homes and things are changing. But so the community of the Hebrew Institute of University Heights ran to Co-op City. And then Co-op City, from their perspective, became a challenging community. And so what did they do? They ran to White Plains. They ran to Riverdale. That's how we came to Riverdale. We came through, most of us came through Co-op City. When faced with a challenge, instead of standing with dignity, you run. Yaakov, Akev, on the heels. That's why he's called Yaakov. And then the Rashbam says, I get emotional when I think about this. Again, he's a literalist. Lance, he's a literalist. He says, wait a minute. Then he has this mysterious wrestling match. And this mysterious wrestling match is between Jacob and a party, as I've said, who has no name. It's an Ish. And Jacob, at that point, is wounded by the Ish in the thigh. Says Rashbam, this was God's message to Jacob. Jacob, you've been hit in the hollow of the thigh. You broke your femur. You broke your thigh. You know what it teaches you? Don't run. Don't run. No more running. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at that moment, he is given an additional name. And the name that he is given is Israel, Yisrael. And the Bible says the meaning of Yisrael is kisarita, because you've wrestled. You've wrestled. You stood your ground. You wrestled, yes? You limped. You didn't run. And so the story, and from this perspective, what Rashbam says is that the mysterious being was the emissary of God sent to Jacob. And in the end, that emissary wounds Jacob, making it difficult for him to walk. As we said, this was God's way of telling Jacob, no more running. When facing the adversary, it's important to stand fast. Thus, and this I'm reading into it now, when Esau sees Jacob tall, with pride, unwilling to run, unwilling to be pushed around, he gains respect for him. That's what changed his mind. Not what the Bino Yaakov said hundreds of years later, that he had pity for the limping Jew. No, he saw a Jew who had some self-respect and self-dignity. And as I've argued through my activistic years, the only way others are going to respect us is if we have some self-respect. When Esau sees Jacob standing strong, he understands, wow, this is an adversary I'm not going to overcome. And so he changes his tune and he's conciliatory. Sometimes the only way to gain respect from others is if one first has self-respect. And according to this view, I would argue, the new resolve on Jacob's part caused Esau to embrace Jacob rather than to fight him. And the Rashbam, living through the Crusades, maybe he was offering advice to his own generation, letting them know that if you're going to acquiesce to anti-Semitism, you are inspiring more anti-Semitism. Wherever we traveled as activists throughout the world, wherever we went, we found communities that were afraid. And communities would say, Avi, leave. You're going to make it worse. You're inspiring more anti-Semitism. Now, I don't want to say anything bad about those communities because we had American passports. We felt somewhat protected. They had to remain behind. But the bottom line is that it's anti-Semites who inspire anti-Semitism, not those who fight against anti-Semitism. And I'd like to argue that even in America, I believe that there is hesitancy to fight anti-Semitism. Because when you fight anti-Semitism, you are attracting too much attention to the Jewish people. And our psychology throughout the generation is that renders us too vulnerable. I remember a couple of years ago, after Jersey City, do you remember that anti-Semitic attack? That was just a year after Pittsburgh and Muncie. So in Congress, Elliot Engel, may he be well, they were all talking Deutsch, who was in Congress. Now he heads the American Jewish Committee. They wanted a resolution to condemn anti-Semitism. Before I turn around, it's a resolution not only to condemn anti-Semitism, but to condemn anti-Islam, to condemn racism. I had them on the phone for an hour. And I said to them, what are you doing? And they say, Avi, aren't you against racism? I said, of course I'm against racism. But now we're in jeopardy. Now you have to really focus on anti-Semitism. And I argue that they didn't, because to focus only on anti-Semitism, they were fearful of doing that. I believe that with all my heart and soul. Fearful. Our Black brothers and sisters, when they said Black Lives Matter. Now, the National Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic. We all know that. But the concept of Black Lives Matter, it's true. Black lives matter. Of course that matters. So people would say to me, but Avi, all lives matter. And I would say after George Floyd, but our Black brothers and sisters felt especially attacked. And so we stand with them. Yes, you feel attacked. Black lives matter. But now, when Jewish lives were in trouble, I didn't see that. I saw our community flinching, and I stand by that. I have constantly seen in my activism the Jewish community prepared to do for others what we are not prepared to do for ourselves in the same situation. I'm proud, for example, that we protested against the Mandela ticker tape parade. That was not easy. 2 million people were marching, and we stood with 20 people. And why were we protesting? Well, we protested because he had embraced Arafat. He had embraced, you remember this, he embraced Gaddafi. He embraced Castro. Well, if you do that, if Sharansky came to New York and got a ticker tape parade, which he didn't, and he was embracing apartheid, do you think the Jewish community would have allowed a ticker tape parade for Sharansky? Never. But here, when it came to Mandela, not that he didn't have his greatness, but I'm sorry. If you embrace Castro and Gaddafi, you're bringing shame to the anti-apartheid movement. But we didn't have the backbone. By the way, when Mandela went to Florida, where Cubans live, he was greeted at the airport by 5,000 Cubans. The city council refused to see him. The Cubans weren't afraid to say, thank you, Mr. Mandela, but if you embrace Castro, we don't want to have anything to do with you. The Jews were afraid to say that. But the message of our Torah today is of this balance between Jacob and Israel, that we have to stand strong, is clear. You need the Jacob approach. You need people to know how to politic and win the hearts on every level of the enemy. But that's got to be with the IDF. You need a strong army. I would argue, and I'm talking much too much now, every time Israel has made a deal with the enemy, every time it's not satisfied the enemy, but it's whetted their appetite. And we give, generally in America, when you negotiate, I give a little bit, you give a little bit. But the brain in the Middle East thinks differently. When they see Israel give, what they say is, oh, now they're weak. We're in a position to demand that they give more. We get out of Gush Katif. got out of Gush Katif. We disinterred bodies from the ground. And now we see what happened in Gaza. We got out of Lebanon. We see what's happened in Lebanon. The more you give, the more they want. And this message, I think, is an important message. And I think that with all the questions we have about why October 7th happened, one of the remarkable things about this past year is the young generation has snapped to attention. They deserve a lot of credit. Do you know now that we are seeing more young Jews in America? They are asking to be recognized as Olim, as emigres to Israel, and they are serving as lone soldiers in the army. The numbers serving are much greater. We thought that there would be less who would be serving. No, they're standing up, they're standing strong. They understand that you have to stand strong in order to be respected. It's not, this concept is not generally a concept that you hear rabbis talk about. Generally, it's always, put your head down, negotiate. But there comes a certain point where you got to stand strong. That's what your grandchildren did, Ruby. They're in the army. They're in the army. And, as I was the rabbi of Garin Sabar, I'm not sure I want to do that anymore because it's an enormous responsibility. And one of the young men who was in seminars with me was Idan Alexander. You saw the video of him. He's not been heard from for many 400 and whatever, how many days. It's a big responsibility. But if anything, I think we've learned you need Hadar Yisrael. You need Jewish pride, Jewish self-respect, but you need it with Yaakov. In all the other name changes, Sarai became Sarah, and her first name was done away with. Abram became Abram. The first name was done away with. When Jacob became Israel, he retains his first name, Jacob. Jacob denotes not only the runner, but Jacob is the one who is a Torah scholar. He fights with an ethics, and I'm very proud of the Jewish army. It fights tough, real tough, but it fights with a purity of arms and an unbending and unrelenting, uncompromising when it comes to the ethics of our army. We have a lot to be proud of. So I'm going to stop here after talking much too long, and I just want to get your input, your thoughts on this.
Why?
Yeah, you can't see.
I don't know.
I can see. We can see. Ted, you're looking like a Rebbe now. You look great.
Rabbi, isn't it always hard to know when you should stand strong and when you should back off? I mean, it sounds like you make it sound like it's a decision you make, but it just sounds to me in the moment, it must be so difficult to know what to do, what's the proper path.
Yep. And I think you're right, Ruby. That's what leadership is all about. That's what it's all about. But what I'm saying is that there was a time, Ruby, when standing strong was not in our lexicon. That's just not what we did.
Okay.
And now the state of Israel has to make decisions. Not should we remain strong, but when should we remain strong? Mm-hmm. And this is what was going on between, whatever one says about Netanyahu, those who like him, those who don't like him, and he's been around too long. It's never good for a country to have a leader for so many years. But he did stand up. He did stand up to the American presidency. And in the end, I think he's been proven correct.
Oddly enough, Jonathan
pointed out something to me, which he was surprised at, but the modern soldier in Israel is coming from the modern Orthodox. He said the left wingers are not the ones who are standing up and fighting, they're leaving the country. But the modern Orthodox seem to be the ones who are taking it and moving it and pushing it. I was a little surprised to hear that, but he said that's what's happening in Israel now. So it's very interesting.
It is, but there are many people who are not in the observant camp who have given their lives, and
Of course, we know that, but he said it's the trend, and he was rather upset about it too.
Mhm. Okay. I think Ted had Ted, did you want to say something?
Yes.
And then Arnie, go ahead, Ted.
Hello. What'd you do, Ben?
I don't know.
No, it's good. It's good.
It's good.
Okay, so I think there's an analogy one could make between what happened at that point where Jacob meets Esau and what occurred in recent history, and that is that God arranged an Abraham Accord, and he got the Arabs, who are descendants of Esau, presumably, and the Jewish people to come together in a peaceful way rather than at war. So history repeating itself, it's not just a modern expression, but it's as old as civilization. And the other thing I want to say, Rabbi, and that is to admit a failing of my own. I'm quite hard of hearing, which is not such a big surprise when you're halfway between 94 and 95. And that is that unless someone speaks slowly and projects their voice, there is a loss of the conversation to my old ears. So two very different points.
Right. Ted, I hope I was speaking loud enough. I hope so, and you're so correct, because I too am experiencing hearing issues. Ted, I did want to say that the Abraham Accords, they were accords that was the result of negotiations. But why would the Emirates enter into an agreement with Israel? They entered into the agreement because they saw Israel being strong. Had they perceived Israel as being weak, they would have not wanted to have anything to do with Israel. And so Israel is, of course, always ready for peace, but it's peace through strength. That is what you're saying, Ted, is the beautiful balance between Yisrael, which means you fought, and Jacob. Jacob is the negotiator. It's not that there's one without the other. The two work in tandem. And what you said about hearing is, as I mentioned, is something I very much identify with. And I'm very much in favor, and I've spoken about it from the pulpit, I'm very much in favor of some kind of halachic system there are systems where halachically there are microphones that would make it much easier for people to hear.
Yes, let me just, I don't think we disagreed on my point with regard to Esau and Jacob coming to some sort of accord, with God being the promoter. And I do definitely agree that Israel, when it is strong, is in a much better position to make peace with its neighbors. A very weak and divided Israel would probably not have resulted in an Abraham Accord as in recent history.
Right.
So I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that that's part of the picture.
Yes, yes. Arnie, did you want to say something? Dear
Yeah,
Arnie?
there's so much to say on this part of the Parsha, but I'd like to offer four very disparate things. First of all, Shalom Aleichem was considered a writer of the folk, but Hillel Halkin once wrote a brilliant piece about how Shalom Aleichem knew Torah backwards and forwards, and you can find phrases from the Torah sprinkled throughout his writing. So,
Yes.
for example, there's one character in one of his stories who refers to his wife as speckled and grizzled. So I thought that was funny. It stuck in my mind.
And
I
by the
also
way,
want,
Arnie, before I forget, my sister Tova,
yeah,
she is actually very, in writing circles, she's very well known. She's a writer of fiction. She's a fiction. She's a satirist. But her new book just came out. It was reviewed in the Washington Post, and it's called Camp Jeff, and it's about Jeffrey Epstein, a good Jeffrey Epstein. There's a good Jeffrey Epstein who's very wealthy. It's all fiction. And he buys a retreat center in the Catskills. Just so happened that we grew up in the Catskills because my parents owned a camp. And this rich, good Jeffrey Epstein decides that it's going to be a place, a retreat center, to reform all those who have made Me Too mistakes. And what they're all saying is that what's powerful are the names that she chooses for her characters. And it's fascinating, the names. Each name is, I can't even think of anyone, but I love that he said speckled.
I also wanted to mention how one of the loves that I have for the Hebrew language is how the words play, the roots play on one another. Like when Esau falls on his neck, on Jacob's neck, and kisses him, and it's the same root as bites.
Right. Nashach and Nashak. Yes.
So I think that's it's just a testament to why I love Hebrew, what little of it that I know. I also wanted to mention about, it always bothered me that Jacob is, I would say, severely disabled in the fight, yet his life goes on without any evidence of his disability. He goes, he walks, he moves with the family, but where I'm at now in my thinking, it changes from year to year, but where I'm not at now is that I think maybe if he doesn't think of it as a big deal, people around him don't think of it as a big deal. And maybe that's why the Torah goes forward without ever dwelling on it again, even indirectly.
Mhm.
The fourth thing I wanted to say is, with all the attention paid to the fact that this wrestling match changes Jacob and he stops running, shortly afterwards is the rape of Dinah. And he, to me, totally abdicates his responsibility as the father of a family. He's angry and he's quiet, and that leaves a vacuum for his sons to fill, and it creates a terrible situation.
Right there.
So I think, in a way you're alluding to it, that, Jacob in Israel, he retains both names. But
Yes.
that to me is a clear case that he's still running, in this case,
Yeah.
running from responsibility.
When you spoke about just now so beautifully about how we don't hear about the consequences of Jacob's injury. As many of you know, I have a very good friend who really impacted my life in the rabbinate, and that's Danny Human, who Danny was a great athlete in his teen years, and he was in this terrible accident, and he became a paraplegic. And he taught me a lot about being in a wheelchair. And I'll never forget, I once said that, Danny, you are confined to your wheelchair. And he said, I'm not confined to my wheelchair, Avi. I walk in my wheelchair. And that really impacted me very powerfully, that, we all have ein bait asher ein shamet. Everybody has their challenges and their physical challenges. And one way to look at Jacob's life is to say that somehow he miraculously, completely rehabilitated. But maybe he was whole even with his he was whole notwithstanding his disability. And who doesn't have a disability? We all have our disabilities. But it was your thought that really triggered that idea. Is there anyone who's whole? No one's whole.
The last thing I wanted to say is that, Jacob lived at the time that Herzl was organizing the Zionist congresses, and there were obviously more Jews at that time that didn't see what Herzl saw than did. And unfortunately, Jacob and the German Jews in general were among I use the term non-believers, but I'm talking about Zionism only. They didn't believe in Zionism, or they didn't see its potential for reality.
Yeah. We'll take one. Thank you, Arnie. Just one more comment. I think, was it Lance that had a hand up?
Yes. My reading of the story of the Jacob and the Ish is that if you think about it as a television play, and the audience is expecting Jacob and Esau to have a battle, presumably Jacob would lose. But what happens is that after Jacob is wounded, meets the Ish, wrestles with the Ish, suddenly Esau loves him. That is the unexpected. That is a turnaround. That undermines and subverts everything the audience expects. And for me, it's what Larry Greenfield calls a God wink. The unexpected is a manifestation of God in the world. And that is really what's going on all around us. and what's going on in the Torah, particularly in Genesis, you can see it. And that's why, while I totally agree with everything you said, Rav Avi, about the IDF standing up, Jews standing up, I have to say that I see what's going on as God winks.
Yeah. Lance, thank you,
But
as usual.
I
And
have
Estelle, you have the last say.
it's a question though. When we,
Estelle, I want to see your whole face. I can't go in front of the
I'm
screen.
sorry, it's a question. Why is it that when we, throughout the years, the rabbis have said that the only way for Jews to exist was to compromise? Because when you think about Rome or Greece or any of the ancient civilizations, they fought, but they were decimated and they're gone. I mean, one of the reasons that rabbis say, or supposedly say, the reasons why Jews are here, not because of God, but because they have compromised and were able to get along with every succeeding generation. What do you think? I don't know.
I think, it had mixed results, Estelle, that for 2,000 years, when we had no sovereignty and we were in constant negotiation with whatever the government we lived in, it had mixed results. And what would be some of the positives? It was in the exile that the Babylonian Talmud was written. It's considered the superior Talmud to the Jerusalem Talmud. It was in the exile that the whole Hasidic movement that emerged, that the movement of Kabbalah emerged. They were positives, like in all of life.
That's
it's
what I'm
not either
questioning.
or, but there were many negatives. The negatives is there was hardly a country that we were in that we were not thrown out of. The pogroms and the inquisitions and the ultimate horror of horrors, the Holocaust itself.
But if the main purpose was to survive, that's what the rabbis seem to feel. That's what I'm questioning. Is that the main purpose?
Well, there's a new rabbi on the scene these days. And not only here, but in Israel, as I think you said, Estelle, and they're saying almost in certain ways, as this often occurs, the pendulum taking it too far. But what we're saying is that it's not a Jewish thing. It is a Jewish thing to stand up and to defend ourselves. It's very, very important. I mean, that's why, I loved Rabbi Kahana. I broke from him in a very serious way. And I wish I had another minute to just make peace with him.
Right, his father married us.
Yeah, I think I knew that. But when people fell in love with him is because it was happening in Brownsville. Do you remember the school strike at the end of the 60s? He said, stand strong. He spoke at the shul many times. Then I think it got out, I don't want to get into it, but it got out of, I think it got out of control. He took it, I feel too far. You can be strong. Look, he's not here to respond. So I'd rather just think of the many positive influences he had in my life. I'll leave you with one last beautiful story I always tell my students. Jabotinsky was the fighter, right? One day we'll have Ted talk about it. Ted remembers when Ted was in the camp in, I think it was upstate New York, when Jabotinsky visited, and he actually died in that camp.
Right.
And Ted, you've shared with me that experience, how you knew something was up, something terrible had occurred. But he was the one who believed in Hadar Yisrael. And like in every generation, there was the fighter, and then there was the negotiator. And the negotiator was a guy by the name of Goldman, Nachum Goldman. Nachum Goldman was sort of like in the early years of Israel, you had these two sides. Jabotinsky was the tough guy, and Nachum Goldman was always negotiating. And they used to travel in Europe in the 30s giving talks. They were basically in competition. And one night, the story goes, I'll tell you who told me this story in a minute. The story goes that they were both speaking in the same hotel. And they decided that as much as they were at odds, that after they would speak, they'd sit down and have a coffee together, a tea together. So Jabotinsky speaks in one hall, and in the same hotel, at least this is the story that's told. Goldman speaks in the other hall, and they meet afterwards. So Jabotinsky says to Goldman, Nachum, no, how'd you do, Nachum? He says, as usual, no publicity at all. No publicity at all. But as usual, I didn't need it. 1,000 people came. I didn't prepare. I got a standing ovation. Goldman says to Jabotinsky, he says, Benjamin Zev, Jabotinsky, how did you do? He kvetches. He says, oi, I prepared like crazy. And they advertised like crazy. And only 6 people showed up to my talk. You know who tells that story? Menachem Begin. He says, I was one of the 6. You never know. You never know. Sometimes talking in front of 6 people is more important than talking in front of thousands. It's a beautiful story. I don't know if it's true, but it's good enough to be true. So great. I see Tova just got on, my dear Tova. So yeah. You look great, Tova. You're muted, but you're muted.
Yeah, I've been having a little hard time, but I'm glad I look okay. I'm headed for 94 in a few days.
Well, you look great.
You're a chicken, Tova. Real chicken. Spring
Oh,
chicken.
yeah. Right.
What is Beryl Wine always says? There's 3 stages to life. Have you ever heard that? Young, middle age, and you're looking good.
Oh, you see, I'm at the looking good stage.
No. You look.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Everybody, happy birthday to you. Yom Huledet Sameach. Yom
Thank you.
Huledet, dear Tova. Yom Huledet Sameach, and many more.
Thank you.
Love you guys. Next week, God willing, we're on again.
Oh, and I hope I will be with you before the very end.
Oh, this year was your kind of shear, Tova. That's for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It was
Don't-
recorded, so how can I hear it?
I will upload it and then I'll try to remember to send it to you. And if I don't, you'll remind me.
It wasn't so much what I said. You should fast forward when I'm through and then listen to everybody's comments. That's what counts the
And
most.
what was it about? What was it about?
Fighting anti-Semitism.
Ah, yeah. Okay. We have a lot to say about that.
Yeah. I love you guys. Take care.
Love you.
Take
I
care.
love you. I love you all.
Shalom, shalom.